This is the Brave Space podcast. Brave Space is a healing place for gun violence prevention professionals and survivors. We meet, we process, we heal in community. My name is Dr. Jordan, and today I'm here with Sharmaine. Sharmaine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, I'm Sharmaine Brown, founder and executive director of Jared's Heart of Success. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. We met probably, has it been 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
It's been about 2 years ago. I learned about your organization and also just the work you're doing in the community violence intervention space. But tell me something about yourself. Like, how did you grow up? Where are you from? Tell me something about yourself.
I'm originally from South Carolina. I grew up in Georgetown, South Carolina, but I've been here in Atlanta, Georgia for 35 years.
Okay. So this is home.
Yes.
Basically.
Now
it is. How often do you go back home to South Carolina?
In the summer months, weekly. In the winter months, twice.
Okay. So you still have
month.
a lot of family in South Carolina, or is most of your family here in Atlanta?
No, all of my family is still there in South Carolina.
Okay. So you've been here about 35 years. Tell me about some of the work that you've done over the years.
For the last almost 10 years now, I've been doing violence intervention work, working with my organization, Jared's Heart of Success.
So about 10 years now.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit of just the backstory. So even before you started working in community violence intervention, did you know anything about gun violence reduction? Did you know anything about this field?
Actually, not a whole lot.
Yeah.
I was working in the medical profession.
Okay.
So I would, of course, see individuals that would come into the space, but not so much heavily on related to gun violence.
What area in the medical profession?
I worked with individuals who had lost their kidney function.
Okay. So really different than
Yes.
gun violence reduction. And now we're both finding ourselves in this CVI, or Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy. But just like you, I really didn't know anything about gun violence reduction as well. And so part of doing this Brave Space is just to get to learn more about the organizations, those who are leading the organizations as well. And so your organization, Jared's Heart of Success, can you give us a little bit of the backstory? How did you start your organization?
I actually started in 2016. It was about a year after losing my son, Jared. Jared died after being struck by a stray bullet. And all because of a conflict unrelated to him. And so after much prayer and guidance, I decided to start the foundation in his honor.
Yeah. So that was in 2016.
Yes.
Tell me about Jared. Tell me about his life.
So Jared was someone who was not a stranger to anyone. And I say that because everyone he met, he was loved, and he would often refer to people that he did not know as his family.
So he had a strong sense of family.
He did, yes.
What did he like growing up? What did he play with? Who were his friends? Tell me like all the back details about Jared.
Well, he was a jokester. We would always call him the jokester in the family. He loved to tell jokes. He would always, even with his cousins, his sisters, he was the one that just loved to have a good time. He was the life of a party, just fun-loving, never met a stranger, and always just a very happy individual.
Yeah, so happy, a jokester, never met a stranger. What were some of his other characteristics? Like, what did he want to be? What were some of his dreams?
Well, he wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he was actually living his dream at the time of his death. But he loved to play basketball. One of the things he did, he loved to play video games. At the time, he was 23 years old. So he still was in that development stage of really just seeking out who he wanted to be.
So he wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Yes.
Yes. You mentioned too, you have, is it 2 other children?
Yes, I have 2 daughters.
2 daughters.
Jared was the middle child.
Okay.
So he has an older sister and a younger sister.
Older
He
sister
was
and
in the
younger
middle.
sister. And then there's you and your husband.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about maybe the months leading up to before you lost Jared. What was life like for you?
So actually, I would say I was at the happiest stage of my life because it was in 2015. Our youngest daughter was just about to graduate from high school. She was the last child in school at the time. And I was just so excited. Just a month prior to his death, we had our first grandchild. So I was just super excited and happy and in that mode of experiencing, being a grandparent, an active grandparent. And so, like I stated, our youngest daughter was about to graduate from high school. And I was the parent, very active in my children's high schools and just wanted to enjoy life. And at that stage where I felt like this is the last daughter graduating, no more children in high school. And so now I could kind of run off in the sunset and not have to do all those duties of transporting children back and forth, going to games,
For sure.
and doing all those things.
For sure. So you are at a really happy point in your life.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about the day or even the morning that Jared passed.
Well, actually, my husband and I had went to South Carolina. I was taking care of my father at the time, and we had taken my father back to South Carolina for a visit. And during the time that it happened, we weren't here in Georgia. We was actually, like I stated, in South Carolina. And so we later learned about Jared's passing after returning home here in Georgia, about 2 days after.
About 2 days after. Slow me down just a little bit. You were in South Carolina and you were taking care of your dad. It was a happy time period in your life. And Jared, you said he was 23. Do you remember around the time, maybe even the last time that you spoke with him?
Yes. I had spoke to Jared the Sunday before his death. We had a really great conversation. And his last words was to me, "I love you, Mom." And I said, "I love you too."
Yeah. And I think we're both getting a little teary, which that's okay. It's a brave space. Maybe they'll bring us some tissues. He said, "I love you, Mom." And so you were in South Carolina and taking care of your dad, and you headed back to Atlanta. And tell me what happened around that time.
So actually, once we got back, everything seemed normal, as though I would think. And about 2 days later, my husband was backing out of the driveway en route to run an errand, and he noticed a note on our front door. So he pulled back in to retrieve the note, and when he saw it, he said it didn't make sense what he saw, so he kind of threw it up on his dash and then proceeded to head back out. And a friend had called him, he said, and as he was having a conversation with a friend, he stated that he mentioned to him that he found this note on our door and said to the friend what was on it. And he said, "Well, you might want to check it out." So he did. As he was literally en route driving, he called the number that was listed, found out that it was the medical examiner's office here in Atlanta. And they asked, did he know Jared? And he said he did. And they wanted to know, who was Jared to him. And he stated Jared was my son. And they said to him that they brought him in, deceased on arrival, over the weekend. So, of course, my husband, devastated, he hung up the phone, immediately called me while I was at work to tell me. it didn't make sense to me what he was saying, but I knew it was serious because his tone. And so I immediately rushed home from work and walked in to my kitchen and would never forget the look on his face.
Yeah. What was the look that you saw in his face?
A look of sadness, grief-stricken, and he handed me the note. And of course, I called the number as well, and immediately the person on the other end took my name and proceeded to ask me where would I like his remains to be sent. So of course, I had to prepare for that.
Did the person on the other end of the phone ever say your son's name to you?
They asked. Once I told them who I was, they immediately said, the next words were, where would you like his remains to be sent? So they previously had said his name when I gave them my name and who I was in relationship to Jared.
Did the conversation feel like dismissive? Did it feel, was there any compassion?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. What do you think you needed from the person on that other end of the phone in that moment? Or what would have, nothing would have helped, but what would have at least made the conversation less cold?
I think for my husband to first, for him to find out where he was in a moment, like he was literally driving. And so, you know, to me, you should at least find out where that person is in the moment before you deliver such news. For myself, I was actually already home, but still was not in a place to process or hear that our son was at a medical examiner's office.
And at that time, you had no idea the cause of death or any of the details?
No, I did not. And matter of fact, I asked them, and they basically stated, you know, they couldn't give me any more information and that I needed to contact the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, which I did. And that's where I learned what took place.
What were those few moments like as you and your husband were processing this information?
We were both in a state of disbelief. Just couldn't understand why. We had questions, wanted to know what happened, and just an utter disbelief.
Take me through what happened after that phone call.
After that phone call, I was able to try as best that I could to process what, you know, was already the news that was given to me. So I literally had just took a few minutes to just sit down, get my thoughts together, and then process what would be my next steps, which were, you know, just wanting to be able to see Jared because we just could not believe that was true, but we were told we could not. And so we proceeded to make the arrangements to have his body released and to the funeral home. And we were able to see him the next day at the funeral home.
How did you tell your daughters?
My husband had already told them by the time I had gotten home, so I didn't have to, you know, share with them what had already taken place. They were aware.
So you get to the funeral home, and you know, feel free to share as much or as little details as possible because it's a heavy topic, and I think a lot of healing can happen on the other side of really difficult topics. Sorry, I'm getting emotional too, so I'm gonna get my little tissues out. But yeah, feel free to share any details about that visit to the funeral home.
So we actually arrive at the funeral home the next day, and they literally, we met the coroner's office there. They literally rolled Jared in on a gurney, and that is how we saw him. They pulled the sheets back, and I literally fell to my feet at that moment, and that's about all I recall of that day.
Yeah. So they brought him in on a gurney. So it's not that the funeral home received him and they had time to even make him presentable in a way that would be comforting in some way at all. And that wasn't the case.
No, not at all.
Is that the standard process, do you know, or do you think it was just you happened to be there at that time and that's when they brought him? Was there any conversation about that?
We told the funeral home that we wanted to see him. I wanted to be able to see him to just know that this was my child before they had begun to work on him. So I think they made a special arrangement at the funeral home for us to be able to see him and before they began to work on him.
How did you get the strength to go to the funeral home at that time?
I still was just in, I guess, disbelief. And my hope is that it wasn't true and it wasn't him. And so I really just did not believe that it was him until I actually laid eyes on him. And then after that, I began to process, okay, this is real.
What is the process, if you can even put words to it?
I think for me, my adrenaline was just flowing because I had multiple things that had taken place. Like I stated, I was taking care of my father. My father had a stroke, that very day that we found out. It was so many things going on. So emotionally, the adrenaline was just flowing. And I think I was just trying to process everything. And it felt like an outer body experience and that I was guiding Sharmaine along the steps that she needed to make it to her next step.
It's almost like you were outside of yourself.
Yes.
Talk me through the funeral and those last moments.
So we get to the funeral, which was literally, I think, five or 6 days later. I'm still trying to process everything because we learned about what took place, all the details leading up to it. We get to the funeral and still I was in a state of disbelief. So I just feel like I just try to take one day at a time during that time. And literally seeing him lying in a casket at the funeral really made me get in the mindset of Jared's death will not be in vain. He will not just be a statistic, another African-American child that lost their life to senseless gun violence, and that there was something I needed to do. If this had happened to my family, then there was something purposeful that needed to come from it.
I imagine that required a lot of faith and even just trust in God at that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How were the details about his death communicated to you and the actual circumstances about how he died?
So the coroner's office had given us the number to the homicide division, the Fulton County Homicide Division and Police Department. And we were able to contact them. They came out and sat down with my family and told us what had taken place, that Jared was an innocent bystander and that a young man had an altercation, an argument with another individual, and that he came back for revenge, and Jared was caught in the crossfire.
Mm. So it was a conflict, and these were all guys around the same age, so
Yes.
All around the same age, and it was seemingly a conflict that could have been resolved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We later found out that it was a simple argument over a broken Xbox, where they had exchanged $30 for. So absolutely, it was a conflict that could have been resolved in a peaceful manner, and Jared should not have lost his life.
Yeah. So you made the decision during the funeral that his life would not be in vain, and that you would do something to honor his life, his legacy. At that time, what were the next steps? Like, how did you even get to not only processing his loss, right, but then even those early steps? So maybe starting an organization, networking with people also working in this space. What was that process like for you?
Well, it took me some time, and I actually prayed about it, and I journaled. I journaled for almost a year, and to see what is it that, God had given me a vision, but what I needed to do and how I was going to be able to fulfill the vision that he had given me. And so I journaled every day for literally almost a year.
Wow.
And kind of put steps in place.
Yeah.
And I still didn't have the big picture. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't even know how I was going to be able to do it. And I just trusted and believed that if God was giving me the steps, he would definitely bring it into fruition.
Yeah. Journaling is such a great therapeutic tool for a lot of people. Did you have any therapeutic support or grief counseling in the months after Jared passed?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. What did you find helpful about the support that you received?
Definitely working with a therapist, a grief counselor were two areas that really helped me, gave me tools and resources, and kind of helped me be able to have someone to talk to be able to process my thoughts at the time. My family, of course, they were grieving and dealing with it in their way. And so I felt like I didn't want to overwhelm them and share, okay, this is what I had going on. And so having another person to talk to be able to share really helped me in that moment.
Yeah. Were you already connected with a therapist, or was that also a new experience for you?
It was a new experience. Totally new.
Yeah. Was it hard to find a therapist that you were comfortable with sharing about Jared's life and even just your own emotions at the time?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I definitely went through several before I was able to find one that kind of connected with me.
Yeah. Which I think is such an important point to highlight, because it can take a few rounds to find someone that you're comfortable opening up with and speaking with. And I know, most of the clients that I work with, it's their first time ever having any therapy. And I always have to encourage them, if it doesn't feel right, then that's okay. And I think it's helpful for people to know that you can try a few different people until you find someone that you can really open up and be vulnerable with. What would you say is if you had to encourage someone who may have experienced what you've experienced, lost a child or a family member to gun violence, what would be one piece of advice you would give them, especially in that early time period, if they are seeking therapy?
I would say definitely reach out for support, because oftentimes what I've learned over my journey in this space is that, individuals, they'll reach out to their family members, and oftentimes they're struggling, and they're dealing with the grief. And so to me, find someone that you feel comfortable talking to that is not a family member and that who could give you, good advice and kind of steer you in that direction of support that, you'll need and give you tools and coping mechanisms and ways to kind of help you navigate it.
Yeah. And is there any time period in which that should happen?
Absolutely not. I would say whatever time that works best for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost 10 years later and it still feel like yesterday to me. And I still have a counselor today.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's no time limit.
Yeah. That's
grief is grief. And oftentimes, and just having conversations with other people, they'll say, I'll hear comments, well, she's still grieving. Yes.
Yeah.
This was my child.
Yes. Yes, for sure.
You don't expect to bury your children.
For sure. For sure. I like how you highlighted that point that it's a journey. It takes time. And there shouldn't be any shame around how, whatever the time frame is, but to seek help when you need it and when you can. I've heard parents say, too, that sometimes what keeps them from seeking help is there's some embarrassment because of what other parents may say, what other family members even may say about them losing their child, especially when it comes to gun violence. I've heard some parents say that, well, another parent, was asking questions, well, trying to, insinuate what did your kid do? It must have been something or some reason why your child passed from gun violence, which is so hard even for me to say that, but I hear it so often. And I'm wondering if that's something you can kind of speak to or address for people.
You are absolutely right, because I've heard it. And I've heard it from some of the people that were closest to my husband and myself. And so people who you least expect would say that were ones that did say it to us or insinuated that. And unfortunately, those are their thoughts. And it did make me very angry at the time when I heard it, because to me it was very insensitive. I felt like, how dare you say that when literally in our situation, Jared didn't do anything. He was he had just gotten off work. He was invited to a cookout and en route, he was caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
So, we've heard that.
Yeah, yeah.
And we have had to deal with it.
Yeah. How do you deal with that? Do you stop talking to the person? Do you try to explain? Because I imagine even trying to explain, no, this is actually what happened can be just as, traumatic, really, as walking away. So how do you deal with that? So
we did address it because we did hear it. And unfortunately, we heard it from people that were close to us. And I'll say family members. And so we did address it. I addressed it and, shared what my thoughts were to that individual. And then I kind of, moved on from it because people are going to think what they want to, irregardless to the truth. And so you have to just say it and then move on from it. And that's what I did.
What do you think it is about gun violence specifically that makes people think that they can say, some really unkind words to a parent that has lost their child? Do you think it's stigma? Do you think it's maybe judging, being judgmental? What do you think it is?
I think it's multiple things. Definitely a stigma, especially in the African American community. And I think just people being insensitive and just don't know what to say. But we know the truth.
Yeah.
And the truth came out. And so.
And by come out, do you mean in court? And if so, can you shed some more details about what that was like?
Well, it came out to us prior to court when we learned about what literally had taken place. And then we learned more details during the trial
Okay.
for the young man that took his
Okay.
life.
Okay. So the young man who took his life, how did you find out who he was? Give us some information just even about that whole experience of going to trial.
So we learned who he was when we spoke to the detective who was working the case. So we kind of had an idea. I didn't know him personally.
Mm-hmm.
Jared didn't even know him.
Mm-hmm.
The young man who invited Jared to the cookout knew him.
Mm-hmm.
And they all lived in the same apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
So we learned about, the whole situation and how it came forth before the trial, and then we learned more at the trial.
Okay. What was the time period between when he was killed and when it actually progressed to trial?
It was about 2 years
2 years.
before we went to trial.
Mm-hmm.
So Jared was killed in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and then we went to trial in 2017.
Okay. What was that experience like?
Well,
Yeah.
To see the individual face to face, it was very difficult to sit in a courtroom across from someone like an arm's length,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
who literally had taken your loved one's life.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard. It was traumatic. It's an experience that definitely would not wish on your worst enemy.
For sure.
But we made it through.
Yeah. What do you remember? Does anything stand out to you about the trial period? Like even just seeing him, like what were some of the emotions and things that came up for you?
Well, one thing that I'll never forget is that when I had an opportunity to turn to him, the young man, and address him from a parent perspective and share my thoughts right before the trial ended, the look on his face and his behavior is what I still remember to this day. He was very angry still to this day. He was still portraying that he wasn't the one that did it, although all the evidence pointed directly to him. He was identified as the shooter, and just literally still in a place of, I don't even know the words to describe, but he still was in that place 2 years later. So it was a disconnect.
Have your thoughts about him like changed or evolved over this 10-year period?
In what way are you referring to?
In any way. In any way. Do you see him, sometimes time can just change your perspective. Do you see him differently? Do you see him the same? Do you not see him? Or how would you describe it?
I really don't think about him.
Yeah.
I just try to put all my energy on the work that I do in honor of Jared. So no, I really don't see him in any way. My hope 10 years later is that he's at a place that he is sorry for what he has done, because 2 years later at the trial, he was not. So my prayer is today, 10 years later, the same that I said to him, 2 years after the incident, is that you will ask God for forgiveness for what you have done.
Would an apology from him be helpful?
At this point, no, because it won't bring Jared back. But if he asks God for forgiveness for himself, then that's between him and God. But at this point, nothing will bring Jared back. So,
yeah. So you mentioned that rather than focusing on him, the person who took your son's life, you put all of that energy into working to just honor Jared's legacy, and that's through your organization.
Yes.
Is that right? Jared's Heart of Success. So
Yes.
Can you tell me about the moment you decided to start your organization?
Yes, I started it in 2017, a year later. And our mission is to educate and empower youth and young adults through effective communication with a focus on conflict resolution and mental wellness. And so we do that in middle and high schools and in the communities. I always say this is after school because a great deal of our work focuses on youth that are at the highest risk outside of school.
And are your programs, are they based within certain school systems? Is it within a church? Where do you all hold your programs?
So we have several partners that we work with. We work with several after-school programs. And then we also work within several schools. So we have a couple schools in DeKalb County that we work with, as well as Newton County.
Okay, Newton County, Georgia, and DeKalb County, Georgia. What, talk to me about some of the programs, like the conflict resolution program, and I believe you mentioned a wellness program as well. Tell me some of the key features of those programs.
So the conflict resolution is one of our signature programs, Resolve with Purpose, and we teach how to be able to deal with conflict. We teach about healthy relationships. We teach about growth mindset. And we do that with the youth that I spoke about that they have been either expelled outside of school or individuals that are at school as well.
Okay. What are some wins that you've seen within your program? Like, what are some successes, some wins, and also maybe even some challenges?
I would definitely say the wins are we've had 4 individuals that have graduated outside of our program. We have 2 that have gone off to college, and then we have 2 that have gone into the military. So I consider those wins.
Yes, for sure. What are some of the challenges that you faced within your organization?
You mean as a whole or with the youth individually?
Either.
So some of the challenges I would say with the youth are the individuals that are at the highest risk and they feel like, well, I don't want to complete the program. So we have ran into that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And what age group specifically do you work with?
Middle school and high school.
Middle school.
And then we do have some youth that we work with in lower grade levels and after school.
Yeah, middle and high school, it's a tough age group to work with, but it's also very rewarding when you do see those successes, like going to the military or going to college. How do you stay motivated in the work that you do?
It's definitely one that I have decided that this is how I'm going to live the rest of my days working with youth and young adults. Although 10 years ago, I was on a different path. And I felt like at that time, like I shared with you, with our youngest daughter graduating from high school, yes, finally, I don't have to work with youth anymore. I don't have to, transport them to and from games. I don't have to do any of that. And then later, I find myself 10 years later, literally moving into that realm of continuing to do this work. And I think that I will.
Yeah. Do you have the opportunity to interact with any other parents who've lost their child to gun violence as a part of your organization?
Yes, we do. We have a program where we do work with survivors who have been impacted by gun violence as well. So we have a lot of survivors that we've met along the way on this journey together. And then we have new survivors, unfortunately, who have came in and we've been working with over the years.
Tell me, like when you all get together, so I imagine it's parents and other individuals who have survived gun violence or even experienced gun violence within their families, what are some of the big topics of discussion? Like what are some big things that you all discuss?
So one of the things that we do is, and I've met individuals who've lost parents to gun violence, children, aunts, siblings, you name it. So one thing that we try to do within our organizations is host quarterly events. Some of the things we've done over the years is we'll get together quarterly, we'll meet, and then we'll have just open discussion. Or sometimes we go out to eat, or sometimes we may do a painting session, a therapeutic session in that form. We just pick quarterly events where we get together to connect and just share space.
Yeah.
And this share some of the things we've been dealing with, some things that we've have done to help us in this space over the time frames.
Yeah. What would you say are like the biggest benefits that participants receive from participating in your program?
I think that community.
Yeah.
Definitely community.
Yeah.
Just having that shared space and being able to speak to another individual who could relate and also understand some of the challenges that you face on a daily basis.
For sure. Did you have any community like that 10 years ago when you lost? No. So was part of this program developed out of a need that you wished you would have had back then?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's incredible that you can take something so difficult to experience, such as, losing Jared, and use that experience to help support other parents who are going through the same. I think it helps to break down that barrier of seeking help. And I think also it's helpful just for people to know that there are options available for grief support. Because as you mentioned, and as we know, even just with CVILA, gun violence isn't always targeted, although it often is. Sometimes, it's random. And I think having more open conversation and just hearing more truth from people such as yourself that have experienced that can really help us to heal in community. So I like that you brought up or you mentioned that coming together and that healing is actually therapeutic with you all. Is there anything else that you want to share or highlight about your organization?
I can't even think of it. Look, cut. I can't even stop these tears from flowing today. They are flowing. Oh, my goodness. Oh, he did bring some digital.
He did. I was like, I hope I don't lose it. I was like,
sorry.
No, Sharmaine, don't cry. You're going to make me cry.
I know. I'm trying not to. I'm so sorry.
No.
Ooh, trying to process. Ooh.
It was a heavy topic. Ooh. So, yes, we can read.
I hope I didn't do too.
No, you did a great job.
Ooh.
So I'll just close us out. I know. So I just wanted to tell you thank you for sharing your experience. I know that was not easy to do, and I know the first time, here I go, about to get emotional again. I know the first time we had this conversation was just a week ago in the airport. We're both crying in the airport. But I think there's something really special about sharing your experience because it not only can help people heal, but it also just humanizes all of our experiences. We don't get to choose how we lose someone or when we lose someone. And I think if we can all gain more clarity on the topic of gun violence specifically, because it is a crisis right now, it's a public health crisis. I consider it an emergency. It's the number one cause of death for children, right? Which is unreal. I went into pediatrics thinking that I was going to do well visits and, easy sick visits, and we're addressing gun violence. And so I appreciate you just sharing your story. And I know that there are many parents out there as well who would appreciate just you being vulnerable. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. This is the Brave Space podcast. Brave Space is a healing place for gun violence prevention professionals and survivors. We meet, we process, we heal in community.